He did a good deed at Christmas, helping a struggling family. But what he discovered afterward challenged everything he believed. Clara's secret will change Gabriel's life forever. Gabriel Matthews sat in the back of his sleek black SUV, staring out at the street below. The city lights flickered in the distance, but tonight they felt distant, disconnected from him. His life was a perfect picture: a high-rise office, a luxury car, more money than most people could ever dream of. Yet something gnawed at him from within. He had everything he could ever want, but it felt hollow. The people around him, his colleagues, even his family, none of it seemed to matter. The holidays were always the hardest. His colleagues were busy with their families, posting pictures of cozy dinners and festive get-togethers. Meanwhile, Gabriel found himself alone in his grand apartment, surrounded by the faint hum of city traffic and the cold glass walls. Christmas was coming, but it felt empty. The weight of it pressed against him, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the news feed. Headlines about the usual: tech innovations, stock market reports, celebrity scandals. But one story caught his attention: of a local family struggling to make ends meet. He clicked on the article, intrigued. The headline read, "Single mother, daughter face eviction this Christmas." A photo accompanied the piece. Clara, a woman in her mid-30s, with tired eyes and a weary smile, holding her daughter Sophia. Their lives were being swallowed up by the very system they were trying to survive in. Gabriel's heart tugged as he read about their situation. Rent overdue, utilities cut off, and no way to make ends meet, especially with Christmas approaching. Without thinking, Gabriel tapped his screen. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt compelled to help someone like this. Not in a genuine way. His assistant had mentioned charity drives and volunteering during the holidays, but they all seemed so staged. This, however, felt real. He knew what he needed to do. The next day, Gabriel's assistant found Clara's contact information. Clara lived on the outskirts of the city in a rundown neighborhood, a place Gabriel had never been. He arranged a meeting and told his assistant to make sure everything was set up for him to help. Money, groceries, and even an employment offer for Clara's husband, Diego, who had been unemployed for months. Gabriel was determined to change their lives. He could fix this. He had the power to help them. When he arrived at Clara's modest apartment building, the contrast between his world and theirs was immediate. The building was old, the windows cracked, and the front door creaked as he stepped inside. Clara greeted him at the door, her smile warm, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "Mr. Matthews, thank you for coming," she said, almost as if she were apologizing for her situation. Gabriel immediately extended his hand, feeling a sense of urgency. "Clara, please." "It's Gabriel," he corrected her, trying to ease her discomfort. I wasn't expecting someone like you," Clara continued, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you for this." Gabriel nodded, his voice firm but kind. "It's not about thanks. I want to help. I'm offering to cover your expenses for the next few months. And I've also arranged a job for your husband, Diego." Clara's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could say anything, Gabriel quickly added, "It's a good opportunity. Diego deserves a chance to get back on his feet." Clara's face softened, though she still looked uncertain. "You don't know anything about us, about what we've been through." Gabriel waved his hand dismissively, feeling a twinge of impatience. "I know enough. I want to help. That's all you need to know." Clara hesitated but finally nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews. You don't know how much this means." As he left her apartment, Gabriel felt a brief sense of accomplishment. He had made a difference, or at least, that's what he told himself. He'd done what was expected of him, helped a family in need. But as he drove away, something gnawed at him. The satisfaction he had anticipated didn't come. There was something about Clara's reaction that unsettled him. Her gratitude was there, but so was something else, something deeper, something unspoken. Gabriel couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it troubled him. For now, though, he was focused on one thing. He had done the right thing. He had made their lives a little better. And that was enough. Gabriel stood on the sidewalk, staring at the entrance to Clara's apartment building. The weight of the cold night air pressed against him, but it wasn't the chill that made his skin prickle. It was the sensation of stepping into a world he didn't belong to, a world that felt distant, unfamiliar. His shoes clicked against the cracked pavement as he approached the door, and as he reached for the handle, he hesitated for just a moment. Inside, Clara was waiting. She greeted him with the same warm but guarded smile. There was an air of caution in her eyes, as though she expected this to be some grand gesture, a fleeting act of charity that would disappear as quickly as it had arrived. Gabriel noticed the small, humble apartment behind her, barely decorated for Christmas. A small tree, half-heartedly adorned with a few mismatched ornaments, sat in the corner. The room smelled faintly of stale food and something older, something heavier. I wasn't sure when you'd come," Clara said, standing aside to let him in. "Thank you again for everything. I don't know how to explain this." Gabriel nodded, his voice smooth, but lacking the sincerity he wanted to convey. "It's nothing. I'm just here to help." As they moved into the cramped living room, Gabriel couldn't help but notice the disarray of the place. There were piles of old clothes in the corner, and the couch cushions had sunk in the middle from years of use. The TV, an old model, flickered with static as it played some show in the background. Gabriel's eyes lingered on a photo of Clara and a man, presumably her husband, on the coffee table. He couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of curiosity. "Is that Diego?" he asked, pointing to the picture. Clara looked at the photo, her expression softening. "Yes, that's my husband." She hesitated. "He's not here right now. He's out trying to find something. Anything really. We've been struggling since he got out of prison." The words hit Gabriel harder than he expected. He had heard bits and pieces about Diego's past, but hearing it from Clara made it real. Too real. Diego wasn't just another unemployed man. He was an ex-convict, someone who had been branded by society long before Gabriel had ever stepped into their world. Gabriel's initial feeling of charity, of having control over the situation, flickered and dimmed. This was more complicated than he thought. "I didn't realize," Gabriel murmured, unsure of how to respond. He had assumed that the problems facing Clara's family were simple. A bit of bad luck, a few months of struggle. But this was a lifetime of obstacles, of battles that weren't over just because someone offered a hand. Clara's eyes darkened for a moment, and Gabriel saw something else in her gaze, a quiet resignation, a life spent fighting battles that couldn't be won with money alone. She gestured for him to sit, and Gabriel did so, his legs stiff as he tried to shake off the unease building in his chest. Diego's been trying to find work for months. He gets turned down every time. People don't look at him the same way, not after what he's been through. And it's not just a job, it's the way people look at us, at me. They think I'm just stuck with him, stuck in this life. Gabriel was quiet, absorbing her words. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even awe for his generosity. But what he saw in Clara's eyes wasn't gratitude. It was something else, something he hadn't anticipated. It was a combination of exhaustion and hopelessness, the kind that couldn't be fixed with a paycheck or a job offer. "You don't have to do this," Clara continued, her voice quiet. "You don't owe us anything. I didn't ask for your help." Gabriel felt a flicker of frustration, mixed with guilt. "I want to help," he said, the words sounding flat, even to his own ears. "I'm offering help, Clara. You don't have to keep doing this alone." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting nervously around a thread on her sweater. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "I'm not doing this alone, Gabriel. But sometimes it feels like it. Sometimes it feels like everything we're up against is too much. You think money will fix it. A job will fix it. But what if that's not enough?" Gabriel had no answer. He sat back in the worn-out chair, the weight of her words pressing on him. He had thought he understood struggle. After all, his life had been hard work, sacrifices, and calculated decisions. But this was different. The complexities of poverty, of an unjust system, of a life marked by things he couldn't see. It was more than he had bargained for. Clara looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for trying. But just know we're not asking for a handout. We're just asking for a chance." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Gabriel nodded, but something had shifted inside him. The simplicity of helping had faded, replaced by the complexity of what Clara was really saying. A chance. Not charity, not pity. And as Gabriel left their apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something much bigger than he could ever have imagined. Gabriel had spent the next few days thinking about Clara's words, replaying them over and over in his mind. It was supposed to be simple: money, a job offer, a few weeks of help to get them back on their feet. But the more he thought about it, the less that seemed like the right solution. Helping them wasn't just about giving, it was about understanding. And Gabriel was beginning to realize that, despite his best intentions, he didn't understand at all. Christmas was fast approaching. In the grand scheme of things, the holidays meant little to Gabriel this year. They never had. A holiday season spent with business deals and obligatory parties had become a routine. But this year, something was different. He couldn't ignore Clara and her family, not after what she had told him. He arrived at the small apartment on Christmas Eve, carrying bags of food, clothes, and a few gifts. Nothing extravagant, just things that might brighten their day. His assistant had helped him select a few items, but Gabriel had insisted that the gifts be meaningful, not just empty gestures. He wasn't sure what exactly he was hoping for, but he knew this wasn't about making himself feel better. It was about giving them a moment of peace. Clara answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw the bags in his hands. She stepped back, inviting him inside with a hesitance that had become familiar. "Mr. Matthews, Gabriel, you didn't have to do this," Clara said softly, her voice mixed with surprise and gratitude. Gabriel smiled, the weight of the situation still heavy in his chest. "It's Christmas, Clara. I wanted to help." He set the bags down on the kitchen table, where Clara had already laid out a modest spread. Some canned vegetables, a small loaf of bread, and a few leftovers from the previous days. It wasn't much, but it was everything they had. Sophia, her daughter, was sitting on the couch, her small hands clutching a doll, her wide brown eyes studying Gabriel with a quiet curiosity. Gabriel smiled at her, feeling an unfamiliar tug in his chest. He wasn't good with children, never had been, but there was something about Sophia's innocent gaze, a sort of hopeful, undemanding look that made him pause. "Hello, Sophia," Gabriel said softly, crouching down to her level. "I brought you something." Sophia didn't say anything, but she handed him her doll, as if offering him a gift in return. Gabriel took it gently, unsure of how to respond. The gesture wasn't about formality or gratitude. It was just pure. Sophia didn't expect anything in return. Gabriel felt a lump form in his throat. He placed the doll carefully on the table next to the food and turned back to Clara, who had been watching the exchange. She was quiet, her hands folding and unfolding the edges of a dish towel. Gabriel could see the struggle in her eyes, part gratitude, part skepticism. This was more than just charity. It was a moment of vulnerability. "Clara," he began, clearing his throat. "I've arranged for Diego to meet with the company tomorrow. They're looking to hire people in his field, and I've made sure he has a chance." Clara didn't respond immediately, but Gabriel noticed the way her hands stopped moving, the way her gaze softened, like she was finally allowing herself to believe in the possibility of something better. She exhaled, long and slow, before she spoke. "I don't know how to thank you for this. Diego, he's been through so much. We've been through so much. It's hard to believe sometimes that anything will ever change." Gabriel had heard her words before, but this time they hit him differently. He wanted to say something to reassure her, to promise that everything would be okay. But the truth was he didn't know. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if his small gestures would really make a difference. All he could offer was a fragile hope. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "This isn't about thanks. It's about giving you a chance." Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with something deeper now, something like understanding, or perhaps acceptance. She nodded slowly, as if the weight of the situation was finally sinking in. "I just want something better for Sophia," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She deserves so much more than this, more than we can give her." Gabriel glanced over at Sophia, who was still sitting quietly on the couch, watching them both. Her innocence, her quiet presence, made his chest tighten. She deserved more than this, more than a life defined by struggle, by the kind of invisible walls that people like him could never truly understand. "I know," Gabriel said softly, his voice unsteady. We all do. For a moment, there was silence between them. The noise of the outside world seemed far away, and in that small, dimly lit apartment, Gabriel felt something shift in him. It wasn't a grand realization. It was smaller than that, a quiet understanding that helping, really helping, wasn't about giving things or offering opportunities. It was about recognizing the humanity of those you were trying to help, seeing them as people, not problems. Clara's voice broke through the silence. "We'll be okay, Gabriel. We've been through a lot, but we've survived, and we'll keep surviving. It's all we can do." Gabriel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. This was no fairy tale. There were no quick fixes here, no perfect solutions. The road ahead for Clara, for Diego, for Sofia, it was going to be long and difficult. But maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. And for the first time in a long time, Gabriel felt like he was part of something that mattered. Not because he had the power to change everything, but because he had started to understand that real change started with seeing others, truly seeing them. The next few days passed in a blur for Gabriel. The holiday spirit had come and gone, but the weight of Clara's family lingered with him, more pressing than anything he had experienced in recent years. Despite the promises he had made, something still felt unfinished. His life, surrounded by luxury and success, seemed more like a distant memory when compared to the raw, real struggle that Clara and her family were facing every day. On Christmas morning, Gabriel woke up to messages of holiday cheer from his business associates, but none of them felt meaningful. He sat in his grand living room, the fire crackling in the fireplace, the Christmas tree twinkling with its expensive ornaments. His phone buzzed again, another message from an old friend wishing him happiness and prosperity. But he couldn't shake the thought of Clara's tired eyes and the uncertainty he had seen in her expression. She had been polite, grateful even, but Gabriel couldn't ignore the way she held back, as if there were a deeper truth she wasn't sharing with him. That evening, he decided to visit Clara again. When Gabriel arrived at their apartment, the atmosphere felt different. It was quieter, softer, and there was a new tension in the air. The small tree in the corner had been decorated a little more, a couple of new ornaments added in the last few days. But the flicker of excitement that had been there before seemed dimmer now. Clara answered the door, her face a mask of forced cheerfulness. "Gabriel, you're here. Please come in," she said, stepping aside. "I brought something for Sofia," Gabriel said, holding up a brightly wrapped box. "I hope she likes it." Clara's smile was brief but genuine, though there was something guarded in her eyes. "Thank you. That's so kind." She led him into the living room, where Sofia was sitting by the window, playing quietly with her doll. The room felt small, quieter than usual, as if the weight of the world was heavier inside these walls than before. "I was just about to start dinner," Clara said, trying to fill the space with something. "Diego's working today, but he should be home soon." Gabriel sat down on the couch, glancing around the room, trying to make sense of the shift in the atmosphere. Something felt off, though he couldn't pinpoint what it was. Clara moved to the small kitchen, but Gabriel's eyes were fixed on Sofia, who seemed unusually distant. She wasn't playing with her doll, as she normally would. Instead, she was staring at the wrapped gift in Gabriel's hands, her small face tight with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Is everything all right?" Gabriel asked, his voice soft. Clara stopped in her tracks, her back to him, her shoulders tense. There was a long pause before she turned slowly, the silence hanging thick in the air. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel straightened up, the unease from earlier deepening. "Of course. What's wrong?" Clara's hands trembled slightly as she set down the spoon she had been holding, and she turned to face him fully. Her eyes were searching his face, as if deciding how much of the truth she was ready to share. Finally, she exhaled, looking away as she gathered her thoughts. "Gabriel, there's something I haven't told you. Something important." Gabriel's heart rate quickened, unsure of what to expect. He had assumed he had helped enough. He had arranged the job for Diego, brought them food, even tried to offer a semblance of holiday cheer. But now, standing there in front of Clara, he realized that his attempts had been surface level, and he had missed something deeper. "What is it?" he asked, leaning forward. Clara's voice cracked. "Diego. He's not just an ex-convict. He's not just someone struggling to find work. Gabriel, the truth is, Diego isn't here. He hasn't been here for the last week. Gabriel's brow furrowed, confusion rippling through him. What do you mean he's not here? Clara's face was pale now, the exhaustion in her eyes more evident than before. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to almost a whisper. He left. He disappeared. He's been using again. The words hit Gabriel like a punch to the gut. He had assumed that the struggles Diego faced were external, hiring practices, society's judgment. But this was different. Diego wasn't just battling an unfair world. He was battling something deeper, something inside of him that had driven him away from his family. He left. Gabriel repeated, his voice unsteady. Why didn't you tell me? Clara swallowed hard. Her hands pressed to her sides, as if she were trying to hold herself together. I didn't want to burden you with it. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just kept trying, kept believing in him, he would come back to us. Gabriel's mind raced as he processed the information. The family he had hoped to help wasn't as simple as he had thought. Diego wasn't just a man who had fallen on hard times. He was struggling with his own demons, his own mistakes. The promise of a job, of a new start. Was it really enough? Would it ever be enough? Clara, Gabriel began, unsure of how to proceed. What do you want me to do? Clara's shoulders slumped, the weight of the truth heavy on her. I don't know. I just don't know anymore. She wiped her eyes quickly, as if ashamed of her vulnerability. I'm just trying to hold everything together for Sophia. For her sake. I don't want her to see any more of this. I don't want her to grow up in this world of uncertainty. Gabriel stared at her, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. Was this what he had really signed up for? Could he help them? Or was he just another outsider trying to fix something he didn't fully understand? In that moment, Clara's eyes locked with his, and something shifted between them. She wasn't asking for charity. Not really. She was asking for someone to truly see her. To see her family, to see their struggles, their humanity. She was asking for a chance, not just for herself, but for Sophia. A chance for something better than this. I'm sorry, Clara, Gabriel said, his voice softer now. I didn't know. Clara nodded, her gaze distant as she glanced over at Sophia, who was still sitting quietly by the window. None of us really know what's coming next. But I'm still here. I'm still fighting for her. That's all I can do. Gabriel remained silent, the enormity of the situation settling in. This wasn't just about a handout or a job offer. It was about breaking cycles. It was about finding strength, even in the face of everything that had gone wrong. And for the first time, Gabriel wasn't sure if he had the answers. But he was beginning to understand that this wasn't something he could fix with money. It was something much harder than that. The days after Clara's confession seemed to stretch into weeks for Gabriel. Christmas had come and gone, but the feeling of quiet desperation that hung in the apartment with Clara and Sophia lingered in his mind. He'd thought that helping them would be as simple as offering a job, providing some financial relief, maybe even a few kind words. But the reality was far more complicated. Clara's life, her choices, and the burdens she carried weren't something he could solve with a few good intentions. The visit to Clara's apartment on Christmas Eve had marked the turning point for Gabriel. It had taken a few days for the truth to settle in, for the weight of it to sink in completely. And as the cold days of winter stretched on, Gabriel realized he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after hearing what Clara had shared. The following Monday, he decided to pay another visit. But this time, there was something more deliberate in his steps. Clara had said that Diego was missing, and while he didn't have all the answers, Gabriel couldn't let things end on that note. He had to know more. He had to understand what was really going on in that family's life. The building where Clara lived seemed even more cramped now. As Gabriel ascended the narrow stairs to the apartment, each creak of the wood felt louder, more invasive. He knocked on the door, but it wasn't Clara who answered. It was Sophia, her small face peering up at him as if she hadn't expected anyone. Is your mom here? Gabriel asked, crouching down to her level. Sophia nodded silently, stepping aside to let him in. Gabriel followed her inside, his eyes scanning the room. Clara was sitting at the small kitchen table, her back turned, her head down. She didn't hear him at first, and Gabriel hesitated, unsure of how to approach her. "Clara," he called softly, almost reluctant to break the stillness. She turned slowly, her eyes red, as though she hadn't slept. She looked thinner somehow, more fragile, as if the weight of the past few days had settled deeper into her bones. "Gabriel," she said, her voice quiet. "I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to check on you. How are things?" Gabriel asked, stepping closer. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't this. Clara pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes not quite meeting his. "We're getting by," she said. "Sophia's fine. She's strong." There was a bitter edge to her words. It was clear she wasn't fine, but Gabriel didn't press. He had learned by now that Clara wasn't someone who would ask for help unless she absolutely had to. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Gabriel started. "About Diego." Clara's face tightened at the mention of her husband's name. She swallowed hard before she spoke. He's lost, Gabriel. I don't know where he is. I don't know if he even wants to be found." Her words hit Gabriel with a sense of finality that he hadn't expected. The hopelessness in her voice made him want to turn away, but he couldn't. "Has he been gone long?" he asked, his voice soft, cautious. "A week," she replied, her gaze falling to the table. "I don't even know where to look for him anymore. I tried calling the shelters, the rehabs. Nothing. He's disappeared." Gabriel sat down across from her, his thoughts spinning. The truth was clear now. Diego's addiction wasn't just a setback in his life. It was consuming him. It had taken over in a way that no job offer, no amount of help could fix. And it was killing Clara, bit by bit, each day that she spent waiting for a man who wasn't coming back. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I've been waiting for so long, waiting for him to come back, to change. But what if he doesn't? What if he can't?" Gabriel felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He wanted to say something, to offer a solution, but he knew that no words would fix this. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a check or a job. This was about survival, about navigating a world that didn't give second chances. "I've been thinking, Clara," he said, his voice steady, but full of a quiet urgency. "Maybe it's time we stop waiting for Diego to change. Maybe it's time to think about what's next for you and Sophia." Clara looked up, her eyes searching his face for meaning. "What do you mean? You've been holding on to him for so long. You've been waiting for him to come back, to turn things around. But what if that's not the way forward anymore? What if you need to focus on you? On Sophia?" The words hung in the air, and Gabriel saw a flicker of something in Clara's eyes. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a glimmer of something else, a crack in the wall she had built around herself, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this alone," Clara admitted, her voice trembling now. "I don't know if I can take care of her on my own. I don't know if I'm enough." Gabriel reached out across the table, his hand resting on hers gently. "You are. You're more than enough. You're stronger than you think." Clara's face crumpled, and for the first time in days, Gabriel saw the vulnerability she had hidden so well. The tears that she had been holding back for so long began to fall, and Gabriel felt a surge of compassion, of deep, unspoken understanding. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't asking for a rescue. She was just asking for someone to see her for who she really was, the woman who had fought so hard for so long, and who was now at the end of her rope. Gabriel sat with her in silence for a long moment, letting her cry. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't have the answers. But in that moment, he understood something important. This wasn't just about helping them escape their problems. It was about giving them the strength to face those problems head-on, without fear. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It might be even harder than before. But for the first time, Gabriel believed that Clara might just be ready to face it. The days blurred together in the weeks that followed. Gabriel's life had gone back to its usual rhythm. Business meetings, calls, contracts, but something had shifted. A subtle change, but profound. Clara's words, her tears, the quiet despair in her voice haunted him in ways he didn't expect. She had asked for nothing but understanding, yet it felt like the least he could give. The truth was clear now. Diego was lost. It wasn't just a matter of him being missing for a few days. He was spiraling deeper into his addiction, a prison from which he seemed unwilling or unable to escape. Gabriel couldn't stop thinking about Clara, about her resilience, her ability to keep going despite the weight of it all. Gabriel hadn't visited them again since the day he sat at Clara's table, watching her break down. It felt wrong to intrude, but the distance was becoming unbearable. He had to do something, anything. He wasn't sure what it would accomplish, but the silence between them was growing, thickening like a fog that neither of them knew how to clear. One chilly evening, as Gabriel was walking back to his car after another long day, he decided it was time to go back. No more waiting. He couldn't sit back any longer, unable to reconcile the life he had with the reality of Clara's. When he arrived at the apartment, Sophia answered the door, her small face lighting up when she saw him. "Hi, Mr. Gabriel," she said shyly, stepping aside. Gabriel smiled and crouched down to her level, handing her a small box. "I brought you something, Sophia," he said gently. Her eyes widened with curiosity, and she eagerly accepted the gift. She turned to go back into the living room, but Gabriel followed her inside, his eyes immediately landing on Clara. She was sitting in the same spot at the kitchen table, her face drawn, looking more tired than the last time he'd seen her. "Clara," he said softly, walking toward her. "How are you doing?" Clara didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was distant, unfocused. After a moment, she looked up at him, her eyes tired but still steady. "I'm managing," she replied quietly. Sophia was playing on the floor now, her gift abandoned beside her. Gabriel watched her for a moment, then turned back to Clara. The weight of what he had to say was pressing on him, but he wasn't sure how to begin. "Clara," Gabriel began, his voice careful, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Diego." Her body tensed slightly at the mention of his name, but she didn't interrupt. Gabriel hesitated, then continued. "I can't promise you that I have the answers. I can't fix Diego, but I want to help you. I want to make sure that you and Sophia are okay. Whatever that means." Clara's lips trembled, but she swallowed hard before speaking. "I don't know what that would look like. I've been trying to fix everything for so long, trying to make it better. But every time I think I'm making progress, something happens. Something always goes wrong." Gabriel felt his heart tighten. He had been so focused on helping, so determined to fix the surface issues, that he had failed to understand the depth of her pain. Her life wasn't just a series of bad choices. It was a constant battle against forces much bigger than herself. He sat down beside her, his voice quiet. "I know it's hard, but you don't have to do this alone. You and Sophia, you deserve better than this. You deserve a chance to have peace." Clara's gaze dropped to the table, her fingers running over the worn surface. "I don't know how to find peace," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared. I'm scared that if I stop waiting for Diego to come back, then I'll be admitting that he's never coming back. And if I admit that, then I'll lose him forever." Gabriel looked at her, his mind racing with how to help her navigate that fear. He knew what she was feeling. He had seen it before in others. The fear of giving up on someone, the fear of losing hope, of accepting that things couldn't always be fixed. "You're not giving up on him, Clara," Gabriel said gently. "You're giving yourself the freedom to live, to stop carrying the weight of everything on your own. If Diego comes back, it will be because he wants to. You can't make that decision for him, but you can choose to live your life, to move forward for Sophia. For you." Clara's eyes flickered with something between pain and understanding. She shook her head slightly, her breath catching. "I don't know how to do that." Gabriel leaned in, his voice steady but filled with compassion. "You don't have to know right now, but you do have to start. You deserve the chance to heal, to find joy again." For a long moment, Clara was silent, the weight of her choices heavy in the air. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her expression softened, her eyes filled with an emotion Gabriel couldn't name. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was a spark of hope. Something small, something barely visible, but enough to make her think that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. Gabriel sat there with her, not pushing, not rushing. It wasn't about fixing anything, not anymore. It was about giving her the space to find her own strength. Sophia got up from the floor and went over to her mother, quietly resting her head on Clara's lap. Clara's hand found Sophia's hair, stroking it absent-mindedly, as if the simple touch grounded her. There was a moment of quiet calm in the room, as though for the first time, Clara was allowing herself to breathe. "I can't promise you that everything will be okay," Gabriel said, breaking the silence. "But I can promise you that I'll be here. And if you need anything at all, I'll help. You're not alone in this, Clara." She looked at him then, her eyes brimming with something close to gratitude, though still guarded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know if I can accept help, but thank you." Gabriel nodded. "It's okay. Just take it one step at a time. And if you need me, I'll be here." As Gabriel left the apartment that evening, the cold night air wrapped around him, but there was a warmth growing inside him, a sense of something he hadn't felt in a long time. He couldn't save Clara, couldn't fix everything, but he had given her something more important, a choice. A chance to live without carrying the weight of the past on her shoulders. And for the first time, Gabriel truly understood that sometimes the hardest part wasn't making the big gestures. It was allowing others the space to find their own strength. The weeks that followed Gabriel's visit to Clara were a delicate dance of progress and setbacks. Clara was trying, in her quiet, resolute way, to rebuild her life, but the threads of her past, the addiction, the uncertainty, the worry about Diego, kept pulling her back. Sophia was doing better. She smiled more often now, her lightness returning slowly, like the first signs of spring after a long winter. But Clara? She was still trapped between hope and resignation, and Gabriel knew it. Gabriel had given her the space to breathe, but he also knew he couldn't stand by forever. She was starting to rely on him, on his presence, on his support. But what if he was just a temporary crutch? What if he wasn't the solution, just another way to delay facing the truth? It was late one evening, about a month after his visit, when Gabriel received a call that made his heart drop into his stomach. It was from Clara. "Gabriel, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice breaking slightly, as if she had been holding back the words for too long. "Of course. What's going on?" Gabriel's pulse quickened, knowing something had shifted. "It's Diego," Clara continued, her voice trembling. He's been arrested." The words hit Gabriel harder than he expected. He had feared this day would come, but hearing it confirmed felt like a punch to the gut. "Clara," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What happened?" "I don't know. I didn't even get the chance to talk to him before they took him away. They found him in an alley, high unconscious. He's in jail now. I don't know what to do, Gabriel. I feel like I've lost him for good." There was silence on the other end of the line. Gabriel could hear Clara's shallow breathing, the weight of her words suffocating the space between them. "I'm so sorry, Clara," Gabriel finally said, his heart aching for her. "I know you've been through so much, and now this. It's like I've been fighting this battle alone for years," Clara's voice cracked. "And now it's just too much. I don't know how to keep going. I don't know how to keep believing he'll change, because part of me doesn't believe it anymore." Gabriel could feel the heaviness in her words. She was broken, not just by Diego's choices, but by the toll the years of uncertainty had taken on her. "I'm here, Clara," he said softly, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Clara didn't respond immediately, but Gabriel could hear her sniffle, the sound of tears that she hadn't let fall in a long time. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I don't know if I can keep trying, keep waiting. I feel like I've given everything, and it's never enough." Gabriel stood up from his desk and paced the room, his mind racing. He wanted to offer her a solution, to tell her everything would be okay, but he knew that wasn't the answer. The truth was Clara had to make a choice. She had to decide whether to keep living for Diego's potential or to finally live for herself and Sophia. He took a deep breath. "Clara, I don't have the answers, but I do know this. You can't keep sacrificing yourself. You've already given so much. And maybe it's time to stop carrying the weight of his choices." Clara's silence spoke volumes. Gabriel could feel her reluctance, the fear that came with giving up, even just a little bit, on someone she loved. "I can't just walk away from him," she said, her voice barely audible. "I can't just leave him there." "You're not walking away from him," Clara, Gabriel said, his voice firm, though gentle. But you can't let his life be the reason you stop living yours. You've given him every chance. Now it's time to give that chance to yourself. Clara's breath hitched again, and Gabriel imagined her sitting there in the quiet of her apartment, tears running down her face. He wished there was more he could do, more he could say to make this easier, to make it all go away. But life didn't work that way. I don't know how to stop loving him, Clara whispered. Gabriel paused. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for them. It means wanting what's best for them. And for you. Clara's sobs filled the silence that followed, soft and raw. Gabriel stayed on the line, offering what little comfort he could, even if it was just his presence. After a while, Clara's sobs began to quiet, though her breathing was still heavy. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, she said, almost to herself. You are, Gabriel said firmly. You've been stronger than you know, and I'll be here every step of the way. They spoke for a few more minutes, but the conversation was more of an unspoken understanding than anything else. Clara wasn't asking for him to fix it. She wasn't asking for him to carry her burdens. She was just asking to be seen, to be heard, to be given the space to make her own decision. As Gabriel hung up the phone, a deep sense of helplessness washed over him. He couldn't fix Clara's life. He couldn't fix Diego, but he could keep showing up, keep offering support, even if it meant stepping back and letting her choose the hard path forward. In the end, that was all anyone could really do for another person. Show up, be present, and give them the strength to keep going, even when the road ahead seemed too steep to climb. Clara didn't sleep much that night. The phone call with Gabriel had left her emotionally drained, her heart heavy with a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. The familiar ache in her chest, the constant worry about Diego, hadn't gone away. It never did. But now, there was a new weight pressing down on her, one that seemed even heavier than the uncertainty about her husband. She stared at the ceiling for hours, the rhythmic sound of Sophia's breathing in the next room grounding her in a way that nothing else could. As much as she loved Diego, as much as she had hoped for his redemption, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Waiting for him to change had become a waiting game that would never end. Diego's choices had been his own, and while she had stayed by his side, trying to protect him, trying to fix him, it had come at a steep price, the price of her own happiness. Clara had given everything, and yet here she was alone in an apartment that felt smaller with each passing day, wondering if she had given away too much. By morning, she knew she had to face the truth, no matter how painful. The day ahead would bring with it a choice, a moment of reckoning that could change the course of her life. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but for Sophia's sake, for her own, she had to be. She got up early, preparing a simple breakfast for Sophia, but her mind kept drifting. It wasn't just about the immediate aftermath of Diego's arrest. It was about everything. Every moment she had spent looking for him, every tear she had cried, every ounce of energy she had put into saving someone who didn't want to be saved. What was it all for? At the kitchen table, Sophia looked up at her, her innocent eyes wide with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" Clara smiled softly, ruffling Sophia's hair. "I'm okay, sweetie," she said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. But for Sophia's sake, she had to appear strong. "How are you feeling today?" Sophia smiled, a glimmer of her usual cheerfulness shining through. "Good. I'm going to play with my dollhouse later." Clara nodded, trying to keep the moment light. But the weight of what she had to do loomed over her like an ominous cloud. She needed to go to the jail. She needed to see Diego, to hear him say something, anything that might give her the closure she so desperately needed. She couldn't keep living in limbo, unsure of where things stood. After breakfast, Clara got dressed quickly, her movements automatic. She didn't tell Sophia where she was going. She didn't want to worry her. The truth was, Clara wasn't sure what she would find when she saw Diego. Maybe it would be nothing more than another broken promise, another painful conversation that would leave her more confused than ever. But maybe, just maybe, she would find something she hadn't been able to see before. The man she had married, the man she had loved, and the man she had fought so hard to save. As Clara drove to the jail, her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white from the tension. The streets outside were busy, filled with the normal hustle of the city, but Clara felt like she was moving through a different world. Everything seemed muted, distant. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, spinning faster with every turn of the wheel. She thought about what Gabriel had said, the need to focus on herself, on Sophia. It made sense. It made so much sense, in fact, that it terrified her. What if choosing herself meant leaving Diego behind? What if that was the only way to truly move forward? The drive to the jail felt long. Clara barely registered the passing scenery. By the time she arrived, she was a mix of emotions: fear, sadness, uncertainty. She had been here before, many times, each visit filled with the hope that this time would be different. This time, Diego would be ready to get better. This time, he would be ready to fight. But deep down, Clara knew that the truth was harder to face than anything else. Diego wasn't ready. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending that he would be. Clara walked through the sterile corridors of the jail, her heart pounding. The security guards let her through without a word. She had been here enough times that they recognized her now, a woman who had been clinging to a fading hope for far too long. When she was led into the visitation room, she saw Diego sitting on the other side of the glass. He looked different this time, more worn, more defeated. The man she had known wasn't sitting there anymore. He was a shell, a version of himself broken by years of addiction and bad choices. "Clara," Diego said softly when he saw her, his voice raw, almost fragile. His eyes met hers, but there was no recognition of the man she had once loved. There was only guilt, pain, and a strange emptiness. Clara stared at him, unsure of where to begin. The words she had practiced in her head, the things she had wanted to say, all felt inadequate now. She had spent so long waiting for Diego to change, waiting for him to come back to her. But now, standing here, she realized that he might never come back. "You've been arrested," Clara said, her voice flat. "Why? Why didn't you ask for help? Why did you let it get this far?" Diego looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I don't know, Clara," he said quietly. "I don't know what happened to me. I've lost myself. I've lost everything." His words hit her like a slap, and for a moment, Clara didn't know what to say. Her heart broke for him. Truly, it did. But she also felt a surge of anger, of frustration. She had spent so long thinking that if she just loved him enough, just fought hard enough, that he would come back to her. But now, she understood something that had been so hard to see before. Love alone couldn't fix this, and neither could waiting. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Diego," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep living in the shadows of your choices." Diego's eyes finally met hers, full of regret. "I'm sorry, Clara. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to drag you into this." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had heard these words before, so many times. But now, they felt hollow, meaningless. "I need to let you go," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I need to stop waiting for something that isn't going to happen." There was silence between them then, a long, painful silence that stretched out like an eternity. "I'm sorry," Diego whispered again, his voice breaking. Clara stood up, her legs unsteady. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, this man she had loved, the man who had once been everything to her. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. As she left the visitation room, the finality of her decision settled over her. This was the end of one chapter, and though it hurt more than anything she had ever felt, Clara knew it was time to start writing the next one. The week following her visit to the jail felt like an endless blur for Clara. She couldn't focus. She couldn't sleep. Every minute was consumed with the echoes of her decision, the finality of it, the pain that lingered in her chest. For years, she had built her life around Diego's potential, around the hope that one day he would come back to her, healed whole. But now that hope was gone, she had left him behind. She had walked away from the man she had once loved, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't sacrifice herself any longer. In the quiet of her apartment, Clara found herself searching for meaning in the silence. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to keep going no matter how hard things got. But now, as she faced the aftermath of her choice, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. She wasn't the woman who had stayed with Diego through everything. She wasn't the woman who had put everyone else's needs ahead of her own. Who was Clara now? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Sophia's voice calling out to her from the living room. Clara stood up and walked into the other room, forcing a smile when she saw Sophia sitting on the floor, playing with her dolls. "Mom, look, the house is ready for the party," Sophia said, her voice full of excitement. Clara couldn't help but smile at the sight of her daughter's innocence, her ability to find joy in the little things. "That looks great, sweetie," Clara said softly, sitting down beside her. For a moment, the weight of the world lifted, and Clara found herself lost in Sophia's world of make-believe. It was a world where everything was simple, where love and safety were always guaranteed. But even in this moment, Clara couldn't ignore the heavy weight that hung over her. The realization that she still didn't know how to fix herself. She didn't know how to move on from the years of hurt and disappointment that had defined her life. She didn't know how to rebuild. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, Clara sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She thought about Diego, about their life together, and about the things she had once dreamed for their future. And then, for the first time in a long time, she thought about herself. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman who had once believed in her own dreams, the woman who had hoped for more than just survival. She had spent so many years living in the shadows of Diego's choices, trying to fix his problems, trying to save him, that she had forgotten how to take care of herself. But now, as she sat alone in the quiet of her apartment, Clara realized something important. It was time to start taking care of herself again. It was time to rebuild, not for Diego, not for anyone else, but for her. The following days were difficult. There were moments of doubt, moments when Clara wanted to pick up the phone and call Diego, when she wanted to reverse her decision and go back to the life she had known. But each time she felt that pull, she reminded herself of why she had made this choice. She reminded herself of the woman she was becoming, the woman who could stand on her own, who didn't need to be saved by anyone else. Gabriel had been there for her throughout all of this, offering his support without pushing her. He had become her sounding board, her source of comfort when the pain became overwhelming. But even Gabriel couldn't fix everything. She had to fix herself. It wasn't easy. There were days when Clara felt lost, when the weight of everything, her past, her choices, her future, felt too much to bear. But then there was Sophia, her little girl, who reminded her every day that there was more to life than the pain she had endured. Sophia was her light, her reason to keep going, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Clara started taking small steps toward healing. She enrolled in a local support group for women who had faced similar struggles. She began seeing a therapist, someone who could help her navigate the complex emotions of her past and give her the tools to move forward. She took time each day to do something for herself, something that brought her peace, whether it was a walk in the park, reading a book, or simply sitting in silence with her thoughts. As the weeks passed, Clara began to feel a shift inside herself. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but she could feel the cracks in her armor slowly healing. She was no longer defined by her past, no longer consumed by the weight of Diego's choices. She was learning to rediscover who she was apart from him, apart from the life they had built together. One evening, as Clara sat on the couch, watching Sophia play with her dolls once again, she realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of hope again. Not hope for Diego, not hope for a future she had once dreamed of, but hope for herself. Hope that, no matter what happened, she would be okay. Hope that she could rebuild her life, piece by piece, with or without Diego in it. And for the first time, Clara felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. She had made the right choice. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain, but it was the only choice that truly allowed her to heal. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. But Clara knew that, for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it. Clara woke up to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, the world outside still quiet. It had been a few months since her visit to Diego at the jail. Since that day, things had begun to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for Clara to feel the change within herself. The weight that had once been so suffocating now felt more like a distant memory, fading with each passing day. She stretched and stood up from her bed, her body still feeling the remnants of the long nights and endless emotional battles she had fought. But today, she wasn't carrying that weight the same way. Today, Clara felt something new, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Sophia was already awake, her little voice singing a song from the living room. Clara smiled softly to herself. The past few months had been full of small victories, both for her and for Sophia. Together, they had begun to rebuild their lives, and with every day, they had found new pieces of themselves. Clara was still the same mother, the same woman who had loved Diego with everything she had. But she was also someone new, a woman who had learned that her worth was never tied to someone else's choices. The therapist she had been seeing had helped her see the patterns in her life, how much of herself she had given up in the name of love, and how, in doing so, she had forgotten who she was. But now, Clara was rediscovering herself bit by bit. She had started a small freelance graphic design business, something she had always wanted to do but never had the time for. She was learning to enjoy the quiet moments, the moments that didn't revolve around crisis or survival. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is, but it was hers. It was a life she could call her own. After getting dressed and having a quick breakfast with Sophia, Clara took a deep breath and headed out the door. She had an appointment that day, something she'd been looking forward to for a while now. She was meeting Gabriel at a small cafe in the city, a place they'd visited a few times before, a quiet spot where they could talk without interruption. It had been months since that first conversation, that moment when Gabriel had stood by her side, offering a listening ear without judgment. Since then, they had become closer. Not in a romantic sense, not yet anyway, but in a way that felt more important. Gabriel had been there for her when she needed it most. He had respected her space when she needed to figure things out. He had given her the time to heal. As Clara walked through the familiar streets, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. She no longer felt the frantic need to rush or fix everything. She had learned that healing was a process, and it wasn't something that could be hurried. It took time, and it took patience. When Clara arrived at the cafe, Gabriel was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He looked up when she entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. Clara felt a small flutter in her chest, a quiet warmth that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. "Hey," she said, sitting down across from him. "Sorry, I'm a little late." "No problem," Gabriel replied, his voice calm, reassuring. "I'm just glad to see you." Clara smiled, grateful for his presence. Over the past few months, she had come to realize just how important Gabriel had become in her life. Not because he had the answers, but because he had never tried to force them on her. He had simply allowed her to find her own way. They talked about the small things, the weather, their plans for the weekend, how Sophia was doing. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air between them. There was a new understanding, a deeper connection that neither of them had expected. And then, as the conversation shifted to more personal matters, Clara felt the need to ask something that had been on her mind for a while. "Gabriel," she began, her voice soft but steady, Do you think I'm allowed to be happy again?" Gabriel looked at her, his gaze steady and warm. He didn't rush to answer, didn't offer a quick fix or a cliche. He simply looked at her as if he were seeing the woman she had become, the woman who had fought through so much and was finally standing tall again. "I think you've earned it," he said quietly, his words carrying more weight than she expected. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long feeling like she didn't deserve happiness, like she wasn't allowed to move on, to let go of the past. But hearing those words, hearing Gabriel's quiet validation, something inside of her shifted. For the first time, Clara truly believed it. She believed that she was worthy of happiness, that she didn't have to keep carrying the burdens of others to prove her love. She could love herself again, and that was enough. They sat there for a while, not needing to say much. The silence between them was comfortable now, full of understanding and respect. When Clara looked up at Gabriel again, she saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of something more. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was something else. But whatever it was a reminder that life, even after all the pain, still had the capacity for unexpected joy. As they finished their coffee, Gabriel stood up and offered Clara his hand. She hesitated for a moment, but then took it. They walked out of the cafe together, side by side, not knowing exactly where the road would lead them, but no longer afraid to take the first step. Clara knew there was still work to do. There would still be hard days ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. She was no longer defined by her past, by the choices others had made. She was Clara, strong, resilient, and full of possibility. And that was enough. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. Clara didn't just find the strength to walk away. She found the strength to rediscover herself. And in that process, she realized that true happiness doesn't depend on others, but on our ability to begin again. Pain can transform us, but only if we choose to move forward. What about you? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to put yourself first? Clara's story reminds us that transformation begins when we stop waiting for change to come from the outside and start creating it within ourselves. If this message resonated with you, hit that like button, comment, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now for more stories that don't just touch the heart, but make us reflect on the power of our own choices. Because like Clara, we all deserve to start anew and find our peace.